right before the holiday is conducting successful transformation deployment reviews. And as we move through this session, we are going to first define the word transformation and deployment so that we're all on the same page. Also, we've done 4 sessions now, and based on your feedback, we've changed some of the font style, so hopefully it will be easier for you to read, and we'll ask for some feedback at the end of the session. So please keep your eyes open for any errors or defects. So we're going to answer 3 questions as we always try to do with these webinars. What is a transformation deployment review? And we're using that in a generic sense. How should it be conducted? And how to use the results. And hopefully you'll be able to gain some lessons learned. And if you're not doing a deployment review, learn how to. And if you are doing one, maybe learn to change it. And in a nutshell, a deployment review is a review of the road traveled from the time you began a transformation effort. And we know that Lean, Six Sigma, process improvement, operational excellence are transformative in nature. So we're assuming that most of you on this call are involved in some kind of transformation or will be. So as you move through each phase along the road, you encounter various infrastructure issues, deployment issues, result issues, and there's a point in time where you want to step aside and take a look and see how you're doing. How you're doing to your own goals and how you're doing to a set of best practices that we call lessons learned, that if you followed a road perfectly, you should have done or accomplished these particular tasks. Before we do that, for any newcomers, as Scott introduced me, I'd like to just introduce our late founder, Dr. Joseph Juran, one of the first to research, document, and provide training and consulting in quality improvement, breakthrough improvement, and the like. We've certified over 10,000 quality professionals, and we continually research and put these kind of webinars on and books. And we also provide assessment consulting, and this is one of the assessments we do. So let's begin. We believe that a transformation should have a roadmap to follow when you begin. Now, we know that not everybody follows a roadmap nor had one, and they try to adjust along the way. So if you did not have a clear roadmap or phases to follow, then pick up on the journey where you are and go from there. We're going to assume if we were to begin a journey, an organization has made a decision to do something different, hence the change. And usually the effort involved in making that change is transformational in nature, and transformational means it's going to affect the organization wide. And it's going to create differences in the way you operate, the way you think, the way you act, so that the change is going to need some planning prior to launching. So once a decision is made, preparation begins. The organization sets out to make sure it's got the resources in place before you do anything. And then you begin a launch. And, from decide to launch, that may take months, it may take a year. And once you begin your launch, we believe you should start small and grow. And at some point, you're going to learn to expand and do more and more, affect more of the organization. And then finally, you're going to get to a level where you can sustain that improvement or change, and you will have the attainment you'd like. Now, we don't have any specific answers to how long it should take to go from decide to transformation. It could be 2 years, 3 years, 10 years if you're a huge organization. But more than likely, after the first wave or phase of change, maybe the first year, you will see changes. And we want to make sure that those changes continue, are sustained, and that you actually have completed the tasks that will enable you to expand and then later sustain. So what I want to do is I just want to review the tasks that organizations do in a general sense, and then talk about the deployment review on making sure you've done those things. Now, any road or any trip is actually a journey to a destination, but it may not be the exact route you planned, so there's going to be twists and turns. So when we talk about a transformation roadmap, it's a guide, not a prescription. So in that first decision box, there are a set of lessons learned and tasks with making sure that you've done these, which makes the preparation and launch better. So for instance, did the leadership team decide to do something different with their vision or their strategy? Or are they just trying to retain leadership? Or did your customers or the marketplace requirements change significantly? Are your customers dissatisfied or have a series of events that cause you to reassess your organization's health? Losing market share, too much competition, or as usual, cost pressures? The leadership team then gets together and decides, okay, we need a change, and we need some methods to help us with that change. And as we learn those methods, we begin to make decisions on what methods, the plans, the prioritization to get started. Skipping some of these steps, either not understanding the driver or really examining the choice of methods, you may be stumbling right off the bat. Nonetheless, we know that because you're on the Juran webinar, you're all moving properly and in the right direction, so we'll continue. Preparation usually begins with some kind of education of the leadership, the management, and that usually starts to begin a new structure like a leadership council or steering committee to handle the changes. It usually requires an assessment of your current state if it hasn't been done yet. That means, why are we doing this? What are the financial reasons for doing it? And then an outcome of that is a set of goals related to the transformation. Those goals could take on the shape of reducing cost of poor quality. They could take on the shape of implementing our new operating system. They could take on the shape of trying to drive us to higher productivity. Whatever those goals are, they're identified, collaborated with, and then beginning to deploy. We also have, in the beginning, start to think about, how do we align these with other activities in the organization? How do we implement it and integrate it with the business plan? How do we set out the methods that we've selected? Are they project by project driven? And initially, we believe you should start with specific concrete projects because those projects gain interest when they're resolved and they gain excitement. And by having a project, you can manage and measure them better. And as we continue to move and get this work done, we start to communicate what we're going to do in the organization. And then, boom, we start to create an infrastructure. And that infrastructure may look similar to what you already have in your organization. Let's try it. There we go. Sorry about that. Where you have a steering team, champions, possibly process owner, some deployment leader, and whether you're using Lean or Six Sigma, some expertise at a senior level like Master Black Belts or at a lower level. And this structure has pretty much been in place for a couple decades now. So when we talk about infrastructure, it's creating the means to carry out projects effectively and efficiently to begin the change process. So by the time we've got to prepare, we've done a number of things. And so we're ready to conduct those projects and continually to build the infrastructure. It's kind of like building the home first, and then later decide to build a rec room, and then put a barn in the back. So the infrastructure continues to be built as you learn and move through the organization. And as we conduct projects, we need to communicate the lessons learned. We need to evaluate what methods worked, what didn't work, the training, the scorecards, all the things you need to do to have successful projects and build infrastructure get completed. And at some point in time, the organization wants to expand either to more organizational units, the number of teams because they want to get more improvement or more change, the type of teams. It might be an improvement team and then later go on to a design team and then a macro process improvement team. It could be something small or something large, and therefore the training may take on a different flavor, and then the metrics take on a different flavor. So as we move through the roadmap, you're completing various tasks that need to be done. And what we call sustain is when you have clearly defined annual goals deployed, the people aligned to those goals, regular review and audit, and key business processes clearly under control and managed. So a transformation review is to make sure you've done the things you've done at that step in the roadmap. So usually we require a transformation deployment review after the launch of your first set of projects, and then after the second year of projects, and periodically if you feel you're in sustain. We believe that in decide and prepare, those problems that you might have missed or encountered will correct themselves in launch, or they'll still be there after launch, and having a deployment review will help you identify those things you need to do. One last discussion on the transformation. This is kind of another way to look at it. In decide, you understand the drivers and change required. In prepare, you assess your current state, and you might even launch some just do it's or some quick root cause analysis. Then you launch and you begin to develop that infrastructure, projects, get results, and then we expand by repeating it, replicating it, and continuing doing it. And then we get to the sustain level where we're having a much more integrated scorecard, better knowledge management system, and now we can transfer to these value engagement teams or departmental work teams to continue with standard work. So if you've had a roadmap or not have a roadmap, you still have traveled from there to here, and there are specific best practices that we know that you should have done, and if you didn't do, they're probably causing some pain. So before we begin our next step, I'd like to ask you a question. If this is not what you wanted to attend, then you probably dropped off by now. But when you ask that first question about what you're hoping to attend in the webinar, I like the first person's comment, how to approach selling the benefits of completing an assessment. And one response to that is, if you're having pain, going too slow, not getting some financial results you expected, employee or staff dissatisfaction, methods not being followed, those are pretty good signs that you're ailing and that a review is in order. Now, I wish we could talk to each other and we can go a little bit deeper, but without a step-aside review, you're going to continue to stumble. If you're an ISO 9000 organization, the step called management review is essentially an annual review of your quality system. And so just like a financial audit is an annual review of your financial system, we'd like to see an annual review of your transformation system. Back to where we were. So we have this roadmap, we're following it, we're at some point in time. So what's the deployment review? It's nothing more than a transformation review led by an expert, whether that's an internal or external, of your organization's performance improvement journey against a best practice which should already have been embedded in your roadmap. If not, against the best practice to see what you might have missed. It's a stake in the ground to review where you've been and not make the same mistakes as you move forward. And I'd like a show of hands. How many of you, or your organizations, I should say, have never conducted a transformation deployment review, or let's say a review after the first year of implementation? So probably not many. Seeing the number here about a quarter of the folks. And for the rest of you, do you see your organization having the need to conduct a review sooner rather than later? Let's see another show of hands. Okay, that's good. Now I'd like you all to stand on your chair and wherever you are, start to scream out loud, Happy Holidays. No, I'm just kidding. So why is it important to do a deployment review? Because we know what gets measured gets done. And even though leadership said, let's do this, we need to see leadership get involved and make sure they continuously measure the right things. So we want to see if we're doing the right things. Also, change doesn't always happen the way it's planned. So we need to know how we're doing along the way. We know progress is made one step at a time, and lack of progress is made because we skip steps. And also, lastly, there's only one way to eat an elephant, and that is piece by piece. So we want to make sure that all the pieces we have are actually going to sum up to the elephant. So the intention of the review is to build awareness of the value of the transformation, build on its strengths, identify the weaknesses, which then are gaps that can be closed. And so we make adjustments to the journey before we continue down and expand too far, where the bad things are getting worse and the good things are forgotten. So that is the stake in the ground. So what is it that you review to? Well, first of all, when we do our deployment review, we want to start with results. If you use the Baldrige criteria, they start with results. If you always start with results, you're always going to have the ear of leadership. And if y is a function of x, we're looking at all the x's that drive that y. And so some of the y's are financial, which then are equated to goals, and that's probably in some form of currency. And it could be cost or revenue, or if you're an agency or non-for-profit, it could just mean successfully meeting the operating budget. It could mean a measure of customer satisfaction and loyalty, staff and leadership satisfaction, or significant process changes. So we want to first have a look at results. The second thing is we want to make sure we look at performance of critical success factors. So we want to make sure that those projects that we launched and the process changes we made are efficient and effective. We usually want to get some kind of picture of that. So where we have Pareto's and total dollars on results and maybe pie charts. On performance, we'd like to see run charts over time, control charts over time, because it shows you a clear pattern of change. And those KPIs that are graphically presented make it easy to see good and bad change. And the third measure of performance, a review criteria, is how long are things taking to do? And are we, according to plan, done the things we were supposed to do? So we want to set up a series of questions that get at how are we doing on results, how are we doing on performance, which is really a measure of our infrastructure and our training and skill sets and capabilities. And then chronology is how well we're doing to time. Now, we have a series of questions, And for those of you who stay on till the end of the seminar and answer the poll question, we are going to send you the series of questions we use for a simple deployment review. And the one you will receive is going to be set up by each of the phases I presented. And they will list the best practices that we believe should be accomplished during each step. So that is, what are the tasks or the initiatives that should be done in each step. So we want to know, in a red, yellow, green, which most of you use, how are the projects doing? Are we becoming self-sufficient? Are we making progress against the plan? So when we talk about sustainment, there's two levels of sustainment. One is you can sustain the improvements over time because the process changes are made, and so you could sustain the operational excellence program over time, and you have internal capable trainers, consultants, center of excellence to keep it going. So we're not just looking at the projects, we're also looking at the skill sets of the leaders, the facilitators, the belts, the deployment leaders, and any trainers or internal consultants. We are using an observation method, which is interview, focus groups, and walking around or doing Gemba walks, reviewing any kind of documentation related to projects and performance. We're looking for strengths and weaknesses, and then set out a set of recommendations to do some countermeasure to the weaknesses, enhance the strengths, and a lot of times, get your own organization to talk about the strengths, because there usually are some very good successes early on, and then you want to sustain them later on. So as we begin our journey, and by the way, a good deployment review might only take about 2 days for a good size organization. So it's not a very detailed, spend a lot of time. It's a hit hard, hit quick, get as much information as you can, and present it back to leadership. So how would we conduct them? Well, we recommend at least annually, and I said about 1 to 2 days at the most. You get a small team made up of some of the champions, the leaders, the experts. If you have an outside company, them too, but only 3 or 4 people. That will be a small team to ask the questions and get the information and prevent a simple response back. Another step is identify the key people. And we don't want you to interview all the happy ones. We want you to interview the key ones. Happy ones, disgruntled ones, projects that are really talked about and well run, and some that are not. And if you could do them all, great. We'll then take the information, compare it, collaborate on what we've collected, and compare it to the best practice and your own plans. You see, a lot of times we find that organizations just didn't know there was a certain step to do, so we would identify it. Other times you had steps you had in your plan, you didn't do them, and we want to ask if they were needed or not needed. Sometimes they were needed, and you got to go back and correct that. We then would normally compile a written report, no more than 5 to 8 pages. We always recommend collaboration on a report, so we present it to whomever the leadership team is and the people that need to make the changes. Keep the word collaborative in mind, and then make sure that if there's anything in the written report that should not be transmitted to others, then make sure those copies are held tightly. However, we recommend that nothing goes in the report that couldn't be shared with all managers and employees of the organization. If you take a look at pieces of our reports, you would see some nice red, yellow, green trending of critical success factors. You'd see some ROI information, what was the benefits, what was the cost, and what was the net on that. And there's all ways to present that, and you might have your own better ways. We want to look at, this just happens to be an example with Pareto's related to course instructor course and instructor evaluations, which are part of the tasks. Chronology is just, we don't expect you to be reading that, but it's just a listing of things we said we were going to do, when we got them done by, and if we were late, was there any reason why they were late, so we can learn something from that. For instance, we know that a lot of steps are not met because teams weren't meeting frequently enough, so we can make a change. Another implementation of solution might take too long because management approval takes too long. So the chronology of activity is very helpful in trying to make changes to speed things up. It starts to get a little bit busier, but you start to see colors and patterns. And a lot of you have your own internal software system that might create red, yellow, green. And what's important is not that you have all green. What's important is that you have an honest assessment. And if everything's green, then you'd better be getting a lot of results. So the goal is to actually try to find things that aren't green and get the organization to feel good that it's not green. And so as you prepare this report, I will give you one tip. No matter how many words you write, everybody will look at the colors first. So make sure that it doesn't show all green. Otherwise, you're just pacifying your own system. Then there's also the detail. And what we try to do is, for every best practice, identify a cause and effect relationship between a recommendation change for a weakness and a way to share or replicate a strength. So there'll also be some words. Now, many of you may have some kind of formal review process. We're not saying to change it. What's important to us is that, are you asking questions that are appropriate to making sure you really continually improve your program moving forward and that you're getting the results you expect? And once again, a little bit more detail on recommendations. And here's the thing about recommendations. No auditor or assessor or reviewer should just give you a report of what's good and what's bad. They should also give you some clear recommendations on what to change. So for instance, if you're having trouble getting solutions implemented fast enough because the champions are dragging their feet, then we need to make a recommendation to evaluate the champions, find out which ones are causing the pain. If they're not causing any pain, which is usually the case, what structural issue is preventing them? And what we find is that there's often a disconnect between what the champions feel they can do and what the leaders can do. So we want to bring those parties together to find a good solution for that. In other words, don't just leave gaps without suggestions or recommendations to solve them. And if you are on this call, there's a pretty good chance you're one of the auditors. If you don't know what recommendation to make, do some research. Ask people who've been there before. Give us a call. Now, we have seen the results of these reviews transform the transformation, because over time, our initial understanding may have changed of the situation, and now it's different. So don't be surprised if you have to change your plans, because you're going to see some shortfalls when you started. That's okay. Don't be surprised if the targets are beyond what you planned or not as good as you planned. What's important to know is, did you do the right things, and will you be getting the changes coming forward? As the infrastructure improves and matures, there's one key lesson learned, is that an organization's failure to sustain over a 3 or 4 year period is usually the result of the infrastructure breakdown. When we started doing the training, we did 4 days. 3 years later, we cut that to 3 days. 2 years later, we cut it to 1 day. And all of a sudden, people can't solve problems. When we see that, we ask the question, are the people 7 years later smarter than the ones that started 7 years ago? Did they get the information somewhere? So if you break down the stuff that got you there, then you should expect to have trouble where you are. And then the last one is alignment. Over time, things get unaligned. Think of driving a car on a bumpy road, and periodically you have to get your steering aligned. If not, you're going to be going off the road or could cause some harm. So you have to evaluate and see where you are. And sometimes because corporate goals change, you may have to realign. So the results from the report can help replan, drive measurement, fix the infrastructure, and realign. And I will also say this, they can also be very effective at getting attagirls and attaboys. A transformation program is a choice that an organization makes. They do their best effort internally and with external folks to create a path that will get them there. People come and go in organizations. Things don't always work the way they're supposed to. But the heart of the program is important. So a good, effective, collaborative review should strengthen it and carry you forward. And I promised myself today that I would try to get to under 45 minutes. And I think I've done that. May have gone a little too fast, but it's the holiday and everybody's busy. So not only do we want to thank you for attending our webinar, and before I flip it over to my team who's going to ask you a couple questions, we will also take some questions if you'd like to stay on. You'll be receiving some special offers. And as Scott said, you can get a copy of this presentation or want to contact me directly. And I thank those of you who do contact us. And if there's any healthcare folks out there, we have a joint workshop that was just completed a week ago, but the second workshop, a Greenbelt upgrade, is coming in February. Let us know. And so I can have a good transition here. For those of you celebrating a holiday this season, please